Welcome to The First Turn. I'm your host, Hyena, and today, Llama and I are talking about This Week in Warhammer. If you like what you hear, give us a like, comment, subscribe, or share, or let us know if there's something you'd like to hear us talk about. Alright, let's get to it. Welcome to The First Turn. I'm Hyena.
I'm Llama, still.
And today, we're talking about Warhammer. This edition of The First Turn podcast. We're talking about some balanced stuff, some data slate stuff.
Both games have had recent updates.
Yeah, some tournament results, kind of some shifting numbers we've seen, like what's topping tournaments, which I think was very interesting post-update of any kind. Because you always run into the risk where when there's an update that comes out, it's either too strong or it's too weak, right? They either do enough to like completely obliterate an army out of the top, or it's inconsequential, right? We saw that multiple times with Eldari and 40K
times, yeah.
Where it's like, oh, well, we're going to nerf them. They're like, don't care. These other things.
We'll switch to these other units, and they're still really good.
Honestly, it's funny when that kind of thing happens, because sometimes you come up with a list that's even better than the previous one when it wasn't nerfed.
Yeah.
Like people were
ignoring it before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was some of that. Just to maybe a less good army is easier to play for most people. That it just becomes more prevalent.
And I think, and then sometimes you run into that weird time space where the update comes after people have like submitted their list for an event. And so the tournament organizers don't require they change for that one. And we saw that with a big event in Sydney. And so they were still using the old. But the results for some AOS ones that I was looking at, and I usually look at anything that's like 5 rounds or more.
Right. And
it was like, well, there was one in the Czech Republic where it looked just like before the update. Night Hunt, Lumineth, Night Hunt were the top 3. And it was like, oh man. Now that third place Lumineth had one loss, and it was to the Skaven guy who got 4th. But that Skaven guy lost to the Night Hunt that got 1st. So he had to run a gauntlet of 2 Night Hunt in a row. Very interesting list, lots of clan rats. But so some reviews, like from Warhammer, were saying kind of Eeyore style, like, uh-oh, looks like they're still too good. Results from Germany, some results from the US, some results from Great Britain, and some of those had top 8s with no Night Hunt in them. And that could be a number of things. It could be that the change was effective, or because of the change, people temporarily just jumped off until they figure out what to come back to.
Because it's a change, and there were some points, too, which makes lists take a minute to shake out, right? So a lot of times we see people are taking lists that aren't innovative. They net list, right? And if there's not some winning list that's out there that uses the new point values and the new, like maybe there just isn't one published for people to go grab and play. That happens a lot. So people are off that army because there isn't a net list.
Well, in one of those examples, our own Slaves to Darkness, they were showing up in a lot less numbers, like in terms of total players. And because the kind of stock list most people were running for them at the competitive level, the points went up on those key units, namely Bellicor, Chosen, Varangard, and even Furies. And those points added up enough that you lose like a whole unit somewhere. So I just didn't even see them. One guy who did do a 4-1 with a Slaves to Darkness list actually ran 2 units of Dark Oath and switched to Chaos Knights off of Varangard. And that's an interesting prospect, because in the event we played, I realized that Chaos Warriors were much better than I think people give them credit for, because their stat line isn't sexy. You're like, oh, 3's 3's -1/1, 2 swings, not a big deal. But then it's like, well, they get better on objectives. They still have a 3-up save. You get 20 wounds or 20 health in a min squad for 200 points. Whereas like the Chosen, you're getting 25% fewer health for 30% higher cost.
About 30% increased damage too,
and over, because they can crit mortal
exactly.
Whereas they can just do like the crit auto wound or the +1 to wound for the Warriors. But the Warriors like really fit into a neat spot because you never really have to reinforce them for them to be effective. And then, as I found, putting them up against Morathi, who Daughters of Cain aren't like excelling right now. They're fine, but Morathi herself is just a nut, and like. You cannot throw your good thing at her. You throw your good unit at her, your big hitter, she will murder them, because your big unit's only going to do 3, and then she's going to go, 5 of your guys are dead. And you're like, oh. And whereas with the Warriors, it was the same. I was like, well, I'm still doing my 3, and then she's just killing like 2 or 3 in return, and then I rally and like get one back. And so it was like, she lost that grind to them. And so I think people are seeing that with Varangard are still very good. their points went up just enough that people are now trying knights who don't hit quite as hard, but it's like, well, I get 20 health on 5 of those, right? They're 4 health each.
Are they 3 or 4? Are they 4?
I think they're 4 each.
That'd be juicy.
I
thought they were 3. They might be 4.
Yeah, I think they're 4. And then they're in 3-up saves, and then they do this extra damage when they charge. And like they move pretty fast, and they have the Warriors of Chaos keywords. They benefit from a ton of stuff. And so people are trying them now. And so that was neat to see some variety in that. And then 2 Dark Oath units, I think, are just fulfilling when people were taking 2 units of Furies before. Furies are great. I mean, flying, and they don't have the Beast keyword. They get 3 attacks, and they can like jump out of combat. Like they are really good, but they ticked them up. And we were wondering, when are Dark Oath going to get some love? And it's like, well, at 100 points now, and you fulfill their little oath when they're out there.
Yep.
Not bad.
But also, they kind of can trade up with some things because they explode when they die, basically.
Yep. They have to be near a Dark Oath hero for that.
Which is a surprise. Yeah, but it's a surprise kind of like, hey, by the way, take 4 mortal wounds from killing my squad.
Yeah, and so that was neat to see. And one person even squeezed the Abraxia in, which I used her, and she's really good. But all she does is fight. Anyway, but other things that I was seeing that were different in some of these results were like Stormcast, who have been pretty bad the entirety of this edition, made multiple top 8s and then top 4s. The lists were very different, though, except for one unit. Most all of them are running Neve Black Talon. So what can you tell me about that unit?
She's so cool, too.
Yeah.
She's just safe is what it is. You get 3 units out of it. It's like it's its own little mini like battalion, basically. It's a hero, which is her. You bring the Neve's companions, which is a unit at 3.
And Gunnar Brand's unit similar to this, right? Like same format.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's might be a pattern we see of being this like in faction and also out of faction regiment of renown that's like a named unit. Like I said, I wish there was more. The Underworld Warbands could totally just do this.
In the interim, if they don't eventually just make one for every
But she's really good. She's safe. You know, she's got like movement shenanigans after she fights. She has a chance of just disappearing out of combat without being attacked back. She's really, really fighty. For being an individual model, but the key is that she can't be cracked. There's no crackback. You know, she just gets out.
That's huge.
And then it's 3 separate units, which have ward saves, and they've got a spell that makes it they can't be shot at. Like it's just a really safe unit to play. I mean, there's no more downside to it.
Yeah,
is the thing.
And the two different ones that I spotted in particular were one had named Dragon Prince Guy as like the general. And then a lot of cavalry, like Palador stuff, and then the other army was not. It had Bastion Carthalos, a bunch of foot stuff, and then but both of them had that unit, had Neve's unit.
I think both have play. I mean, if you're going foot unit with Stormcast, it's like you really got to tailor what your game plan is, right? Because each different foot unit, there's 5 of them,
right, has
like a different role.
Okay,
right. So like Liberators both have the Ruination keyword, which is very good, and they have crit mortals when they swing.
That is good.
It's pretty decent, but their damage output is only middling.
Yep.
Right. You've got Vanquishers, the Great Sword guys, who don't have the Ruination keyword, but they're Warrior Chamber, which synergizes with some things, but they're +1 damage against targets that have 5 or more models. So that's most things.
Yeah.
Just being 2 damage per guy is
like a sweep.
Pretty great.
Yeah.
Then you've got your Vindictors, which are the spear guys, who, when they're holding objectives, when they receive a charge, they're +1 rend, and they can make that charging unit fight last.
That's pretty good.
So they get to they always kind of, they usually get their swings in before they get hit. So it's like everything has a purpose. And then you've got your Rangers, which do a different thing. You've got I guess you technically have your Vigilors, which have their own different role, which are the skirmishy unit that are both good at shooting and fighting. They're just as fighty as any of the guys, but they also have a bow attack, 2 shots, hail and 3s. And then you've got your Rangers, which have the skirmishy kind of melee attacks plus shooting, jumping around the board shenanigans with some things. Retreating from combat and still charging and shooting. All of it's got roles and it's all good.
I think that army's just going to take the longest to solve because of its mountain of variety. I'd sent you the list for a Skaven guy who did well.
I saw one list that did well that was just 100 clan rats. And then it was like it was a Grey Seer, 100 clan rats, Galvanier, which is the warlock with the lightning cannon.
2 units of 6 rattling.
2 units of 6 rattlings, and then a unit of 6 galvanizer.
The power stone gun.
So it was 3
yeah.
full weapon teams. Was there? There wasn't the big chariot
Nope.
Gatling gun in it, right? It
No.
was just weapon teams.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which I think can do well. I mean, it's a lot of bodies to chew through. Clan Rats rally, they come back. You can bring back units of 20.
I know
40 dice.
I know that clan rats are tough. They're frustrating to deal with. Like they all die in droves, but there's so many, and then and the fact that they come back.
Yeah, you can clog the board. It's just a lot of wounds to get through, and then any of that shooting that they bring is just good.
Yeah.
Like rattling cannons are probably, I think they're the most reliable shooting that Skaven have, especially when you bring in a unit of like 6 of them. It's pretty solid.
Yep.
I think the list I playtested and went 3-0 in our tournament probably would do just fine against it. Mostly because they're fast, so I can get in range and get within that bubble of like no target to be able to shoot them and pick them off. And all the dragons shoot in combat, so you can't tie them up.
Yep.
3-up saves are great.
Well, and if
there's a lot of things.
If the only real damage dealer in the army is the guns, and you have an army in response can like ignore the wrath and get to the guns, then once the guns are dead, they're trying to kill dragons with clan rats, and that's tricky.
And I wouldn't mind like retreating away from clan rats to go get objectives for my dragon.
Yep.
Things like that. Like, it takes some mortal wounds, but go get an objective.
Yep.
I had tons of healing in my list, which helped a lot. Which is really funny. But counterplay all over the place. I think there's definitely room for certain lists to counter other ones. I don't think there's going to be any one best list, which is, I think, healthy for a game.
Yep.
That there's not just one, I win against everything kind of thing. Grav guns back in 6th edition,
where it was best, where it was good against every target.
Literally.
Yeah.
There was no bad target.
Yep.
It wounded everything on 2s. Vehicles just got crushed by them. It ignored all armor. It's just like, come on, guys. This is too good.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's very, very good to see. I'm excited to try much more lists too. I'm actually building other lists for armies that I wasn't thinking about. I was building a Slanesh list. I don't have enough Slanesh models to play, but same
Slanesh
thing. Looks really good because I was thinking about, it's like, well, I mean, I've got tons of Seekers. I've got like some of the old ones, the Marauders running the Seekers, and the Demon side. I've got the Demon Prince, Sigvald. I've got him. I forgot. I had put together and painted him a long time ago.
I've got one too. I guess.
I guess I got all this stuff for them already. I could pretty easily transition into getting some mortals and just playing them.
I think they and Blades of Corn benefited some from the update. I know they had some points come down. So we'll see how they fare. But then I kept seeing more where the ones that were near the bottom for a while, like Ironjaws had one that did well, and Fireslayers had one that did well, and I mean, Ossiarchs have been fine. They had one that they won. But yeah, I was all of a sudden seeing these other armies get that 4-1 or better mark, which is good to see. I do still think Night Hunter fine, and I do think Lumineth are still super good.
Yeah.
But we'll see if the number of players on them comes down, which helps. I don't know what their worst matchups are though, other than each other.
Yeah. I kind of feel like if you can get in close to Lumineth, obviously, that's a problem.
They don't have great armor saves.
Yeah. So I kind of feel like, or mortal wound damage too. I think Stormcast. Jeez. Stormcast, I had Sylvaneth on the brain, can do pretty good against Lumineth. Just because it's, there's a lot of mortal damage. There's really good saves, which hurts against, who cares about your bows if I've got just...
Right, and a lot of those Lumineth have really bad combat stats.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. And I saw a Maggotkin one that had...
So that is interesting to me. I don't understand how that works. Because, I mean, Maggotkin are fine, but their roster's not big enough. Their
roster's small.
Their stats just aren't good enough compared to their costs. I don't know.
And even though they added a bonus to their mechanic, it still takes a while to get it going.
Yeah.
It's just now less likely to... Because what happened is, even if you did get it going prior to the update, as soon as that unit died, now it didn't exist anywhere.
Yeah.
And so you had to start it all over. Well, now there's that chance it can bounce to something, but you still have to get it going in the first place.
You still have to spend the first 2 or 3 turns spreading it.
Just before then, and spreading.
So then at the end of the game, you start popping it for mortal damage. But it's just like...
So the approach that this, and it might have just been the meta, it was a good call. He took each of the 3 Maggoth lords, the named guys.
Who are, by themselves, all pretty powerful.
Yep. I think each of them has a use. And then did 5 regiments in the army, a full 5 regiments. The general's regiment was just a Rotbringer sorcerer on foot with a min unit of Putrid Blight Kings. And then it was the first Maggoth Lord with another unit of min Putrid Blight Kings and Rotmire Creed. You need Rotmire Creed because they can actually spread the disease from range.
Right.
And then, but they die. Then he took Horticulus Slimex,
the snail?
The guy on the snail, with 2 beasts, just because that's a little package. Then took one of the other Maggoth bros just on his own. And then the last regiment was the third one, I think also just on his own. So he just had like a couple of units and then all these named guys, like 4 named guys and a sorcerer.
Well, I think we have noticed that characters with names generally tend to be worth their cost.
Yep.
They're usually pretty powerful and
They've made it pretty good.
Pretty worth it. Generics,
less good.
Not so much. Except maybe one named character that I can think of, Eternus. Maybe he's not worth his cost.
He's pretty bad.
Yeah, he's...
Generic Chaos Lord on Steed is better than
him. Him and Celestin Prime. Just not good named characters. The Prime hits hard, but that's all he does now.
Yeah, Eternus doesn't even do that. He just hopes to come back.
He don't even do that.
Yeah. And, well, anyway, so, it could have just been a weird meta call and people weren't prepared for it. And this guy might have just really known his stuff with those units. But, whatever. I do think it's an army that needs some help. But we otherwise, for the rest of the year, really aren't going to get updates for Age of Sigmar outside of Slaves to Darkness.
Slaves to Darkness, yeah. I mean, do we know that there's no update coming for that, too? They haven't said anything about their general's handbook, not handbook, what do I call them? Balance?
The battle scroll?
Battle scroll?
Right, or war scroll, or battle scroll.
Battle scroll. I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if there was another one. I mean, if they're doing another 40K one.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Which, in light of this chapter approved that just happened with some points changes, we know some people traveling to GT, Midmo, which is in the middle of Missouri, hence the name.
Ashland.
Yeah, it's
Ashton.
It's like not near Columbia, but kinda.
Yeah. Something.
Yeah, it's middle of nowhere. Neat location though. It's always well run. But I know some of our locals had to tweak the lists they were playing based on that. Some stuff that needed to be adjusted is or has been
within 40K.
Yeah, within 40K. But then, and I don't know that much about how much it impacted. I know Necrons were one that they wanted to look at. Dark Angels. Mm-hmm. There was something about a Space Marine thing that did get updated. I think they didn't like that everybody was taking like the same detachment and then using the same exact enhancement or whatever it is, no matter what chapter they were playing, Divergent or Codex. And so they made some adjustments there. But I think most interesting to me, before I talk about something I don't know because I didn't read it all, is they said they're going to do another balanced data slate this year for 40K, and they want to specifically focus on kind of restructuring Space Marines a bit.
Interesting.
And so I think they've realized what we've talked about, not just this edition, but forever, that Space Marines themselves are boring. They don't do anything. They're supposed to be, of the baseline infantry across the galaxy, they're supposed to be the most elite.
What do they win at? What's their best stat? Like stat wise, what are they better than anyone else at? Nothing.
No,
because there's tons of infantry in the game that are like battle line infantry that have toughness 4.
Yep. There's
plenty of them that have better weaponry than Space Marines. Bolters suck. There's plenty of them that have weapons that are stronger, better AP, more shots on baseline infantry, same if not better ballistic skill. Like fighting stats, nope. They don't fight.
Nope.
They're not like shooting units that could also fight really well in combat either. Nope. They punch almost no better than a guardsman.
Yeah, and but cost so many more points than most baseline.
They have a 3-up save. That's what they have.
Right, and 2 base wounds, and they've overvalued that.
Yeah.
And so they've had it for too long. Every other unit in the game since they started this really with like 8th edition when they broke away from 10 being a cap on stuff and got rid of useless things like initiative and got rid of like a vehicle chart and they made these huge changes. The one thing they didn't change was so many of the Space Marine stats.
Well, it was just infantry stats.
Yeah.
So, again, what we had before was most things in the game, talking about 6th, 7th edition, were toughness 3 or 4, or were toughness 6 or 7. It was like in that. So you were a monster or a something like that. You were toughness 6, toughness 7. If you were not that, you were an infantry that was toughness 3. You were a biker or a space marine that was toughness 4. There was the occasional thing in that tough 5 range. But back in those editions, every point of strength equated to +1 to wound,
right,
compared to your target.
Yep.
And so like the wound chart was much tighter. So it mattered a lot if you had toughness 4 versus toughness 5.
Yeah, it was huge.
All of a sudden, a gun that's strength 4 goes from winning on 4s to 5s. A strength 5 gun goes from 3s to 4s. Like that's a big deal.
And a strength 9 gun
insta-killed you.
Goes from auto-killing you to not auto-killing you.
Exactly.
When you were tough 5.
Yeah.
And so we don't know what it means yet. I guess if we were to speculate, I was talking to Rhino a little bit about that yesterday. And so even though you were just talking about how some of the stat lines for like Stormcast are kind of vanilla, they still do it better, I think, than Space Marines to a degree. Because some of them have special rules, some of them have rend built in, some of them have crit mortals. And like on the 40K side, Marines don't. They don't punch, they don't shoot well. And so I think they might seriously consider, they might shake up the detachments a bit.
Sure.
Because right now everyone's only taking like 1. Or if you're Blood Angels, Dark Angels, you might borrow 1 and then you just... But even then, those Divergent chapters aren't taking tactical Marines. They're just taking their ultra specialized, hey, we can fight units.
In that space.
Yeah.
But that kind of leads me to the leads us to where we think maybe the changes will be, right?
Right.
Because again, high-end toughness stuff, vehicles, monsters, whatever, they all got touched, right? Everything got bumped up from 6 to 8 up to what now 7, 8. What's the lowest toughness on a vehicle? Maybe 7? 7 to 14.
Right.
Like they got spread out. They're much different. Infantry is still tucked in that 3 to 4, 3 to 5 range for toughness. I think a stat overhaul is what's required to make Space Marines viable.
And if they still want to keep some things different, like if they bump Space Marines to say tough 5,
right?
Because in their armor and with their enhancement, like they really are tougher than like say an orc. And if they're worried, that's like, well, but now what makes, say, Death Guard unique? It's like, well, they can still be tough 5, but you give them...
Might as well to hit them.
You give them a feel no pain. You give them a regen mechanic. You give them something that's very nurgly. And now you don't have to like worry about them being samey.
Give them that ward save. Exactly. Make them negate some of the damage instead of just...
Make them move a little slower than a regular Marine, but they're harder to bring down. And so they can do it that way. And then... I mean, even if because they don't just want to make Marines cheaper forever.
Right.
That's not...
Which they have been doing.
Right. And that's not the right way to do it. So if you're going to have them be these like 16 to 20 point per model guys, which they always try to keep them in that, then give them 3 swings with rend. Give their bolt gun 2 shots with rend that are a higher strength. A bolt gun round should look at any other infantry in the galaxy and basically explode it.
Because I think currently a bolt rifle is 2 shots, assault, rapid fire 1. So they get hit within half range, it's a 3rd shot.
Okay.
And then I think they're assault and heavy. So they can do everything. Like they can hit, they instantly hit better. If they can advance and still shoot them, if they get close, they can get an extra shot. But it's, even in best scenario, it's 3 shots at strength 4, which does nothing.
Nope.
It just does nothing. And so, like, I mean, make 5 the baseline for Space Marines. Make all their guns strength 5. Give them some rend. Give their toughness at strength 5. And then you can scale it up from that, right? So a heavy bolter all of a sudden isn't strength 5 anymore because the regular bolter is. Maybe it's strength 6.
Right.
That changes some brackets. That makes that gun maybe relevant.
Right.
Make it so that a Terminator is now strength 6 instead of strength 5. Or tough strength 6 instead of 5.
And then if they want to
That's a big deal.
And if they want to keep differentiating those, like what suit of armor they're wearing, it's like, well, you can do things then like, why not have Gravis be a 2-up save?
Right.
Terminator you separate because they have their invuln, like, and they can do things like that to make it feel more like Marines, keep them priced in that elite range, but then make them elite. They don't have to be custodian elite,
Right.
obviously, but
custodians are so far elite
Yeah.
that their point costs don't make any sense.
yep.
Because they both have like the best weapons of any like Imperium's infantry, but they also have these crazy powerful weapons. They're all tough 7 or some shit.
Mm-hmm.
They all have like 5 swings in melee with 2 damage weapons. It's just like, for how much? How many more points than a Space Marine? It's double the cost of a Space Marine. You get all of that bullshit. You know what I mean?
And and unfortunately they're performing, I think, even worse than Marines right now. But I think that comes down to the fact that Marines can choose from so many chapters,
Yeah.
and then their detachments are maybe better. And in 40K with such lethality, having an army with that low a model count as custodians do, they're always going to. I think balancing them is just like trying to balance knights. But
Because some things are so good against them that it's
Right.
like when you're good against it, you're
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah,
and
you
you
just-
just evaporate them.
Yep.
But if you don't have an answer for it, it's like this
brick
is
wall.
this is
Yeah.
hopeless.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the nature of that kind of army, and that's why it's so hard to balance. It's like
is.
you shouldn't have introduced it in the first place.
exactly.
It's an army of one type of thing. So if I can deal with that one type of thing, I got your number.
Yep.
You know?
And it's even lore wise, I don't know if it made sense for them to make an army out of them anyway, because it's like these are bodyguards who don't leave Earth.
Right.
Like
So if they were wrapped into say like Agents of the Imperium,
which they
which they just did
Right.
an update for them. If custodians were but any of these like Imperial units that shouldn't actually be armies, if they were wrapped up in there too,
right.
that would make sense.
Yep.
An Inquisitor, some custodians, some Sisters of Battle in the same army, like that kind of makes sense.
It does.
Them being their own army, I think doesn't make sense a lot
Nope.
because they've got a smaller roster than even like
Almost everything.
Death Watch.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it's just really it's a weird thing to have done, and undoing it will make a lot of people
That's
I think
just
upset.
it. That's just it. They've now gone a couple of editions in, and so the only thing they can do is expand the roster with made up stuff,
Right.
To justify.
But it's like the whole idea with people wanting these really obscure armies
Yeah.
to be armies, like
Exodites.
Exodites.
Hrud.
Yeah, it's just like these are very, very tiny populations
Yeah.
that wouldn't be a standing army in the galaxy, right? Tau is barely big enough to be a standing force in the galaxy. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, they've expanded, sure, but it's like
Yeah, when they zoom out, though, it's like
it's a pea.
Yeah.
You know, like it's nothing. Custodians, how many total custodians exist?
It's like 10,000.
A couple thousand.
Yeah.
Yeah, like.
But they're all on Earth.
That's not an army.
Yeah.
How many Marines are there? Millions.
Yep.
You know.
How many guardsmen?
How many
are there?
guardsmen are there? Trillions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Limitless.
Yep.
How many Tyranids are there?
Yeah.
Beyond
Limitless.
count.
Yeah.
And so like that's kind of the point though, is it's like, well, make them so elite that they're so far statted beyond anything else. It's like,
And it becomes hard to balance.
yeah.
And so from one edition to the next, both custodians and knights have these huge swings up and down because it's so difficult to get that right. But with Space Marines, there have been times when they've gotten it right before, but they just had stat lines that they did not move with the rest of the game, and so they need to be strength tough 5. I think that you have to just flat make them that. And then put some rend on their stuff.
Yep.
And that makes a huge difference.
Bump up the base gun strength
Yep.
of their thing. Like, give them an extra make it 3 attacks per guy. Because I'll tell you what, 3 bare knuckle attacks in close combat is still not going to break the game.
Nope.
It just won't.
Nope.
You know, you give them 5 attacks apiece. It wouldn't. You're not gonna be like, yeah, I'm charging in my 5 no rend punches in with this unit of 25 attacks. It's nothing.
Nope.
You know what I mean? It's just. That's why you need the dedicated melee units that have strength 7, strength 8, multiple attacks with a special
Rend
lethal
with a thing,
hits and all that. That's how the close combat armies work. If these guys could potentially at least punch down guardsmen when they get in combat with them, that might be all right for a non-dedicated like melee unit.
Yeah.
I think I'd be okay with that.
Yeah, because for the longest time it was you could buy 3 guardsmen for a Marine, and then when you did the rolls, like those 3 guardsmen on average
Killed a Marine.
beat the Marine.
Yeah.
And so it was like, why would I ever take tactical Marines in?
No.
So the only time people use Marines is when they take the ultra elite, ultra killy,
Right. You bring your Blade Guard vets. You bring your jump pack
Centurions.
assault
You bring
units
your
that do have 4 or 5 attack with mortal wounds on the charge and fly and okay, sure.
Yep.
But again, this is a very shooty game.
It is.
Being good in melee is not good enough almost ever.
Nope.
Like-
and in the examples we have of stuff that is like World Eaters will have the 8-bound units that are bananas in melee, and they have to be because they can get shot all the way there.
They're the best unit in that army, but they're also considered not very good in the game because all they do is deep strike and then melee.
Yep.
It's like,
and in 40K, that's a risk.
It's hard.
Yeah.
If that unit existed in AOS, you'd be like, holy crap, this unit is amazing.
Yep.
Because nothing is quite statted like them in AOS.
Nope.
Like, there are no melee.
No, even the most Death Star units are not like that.
Yeah.
But that's just it, and they have to do that. I mean, in the Tyranid army, which I know, who are surprisingly not that melee fighty, but stuff like Gene Stealers are. Mm-hmm. But even then, it's the same thing. They had to like overtune their melee because that's the only thing they do is run and fight. And in 40K, everything can die. Until you make that thing that can't, which sometimes happens.
But AOS, everything dies, right? Because you don't have to worry about the toughness gate. Everything can wound your monster.
Yep.
Right? All you really have is a save. You might have a buff that it takes -1 off of a wound roll or something occasionally, but and
there's so little re-rolling in that game.
Yeah.
If that's one thing I learned from our recent reps and the tournament. There's just AOS. It's so nice. If you're used to re-rolls, you might miss them.
Yeah.
But it's not needed in the AOS. I don't miss them.
Yeah.
Like
sometimes you just straight up biff a roll, and it's like, well, that happened.
Yep.
You roll 7 dice. I need to get 2 hits.
I also think a system though of like flat modifiers, flat, either way, plus or minus, just is cleaner. And so like what your unit does. Mm-hmm. Whereas like so much of 40K, it's a part of the game. I don't think it's ever going away. Every single dice roll can somehow be re-rolled. And so it just makes some sequences so long to get to, so I just rolled my 20 Orc Boys charged into your 10 Necron Warriors. That's 80 dice, chugga roll. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, well, I have this thing, so I get re-rolls to hit, chugga roll. Okay, 63 hits. Now I got to roll to wound. What are you, tough 4 is your Necron, so I need 4s. We're on 3s. Or Orcs tough strength 5. Yeah, and then you're like chugga roll, and then it's like, well, I get re-rolls.
It might be strength 6 with their weapon.
Maybe
doesn't matter.
Standard boys.
Yeah.
But then it's like, well, then I've got this guy nearby, or this once per game. More re-rolls, chugga roll, and then you do that, and it's like, okay, so 42 wounds, and then the Necrons will go to roll their saves, and it's like, well, I did this thing, so I'm on 2s or whatever. Yep. So it's like chugga
Here's my saves.
Roll.
Oh, I have reanimation protocols. Roll. Oh, I get to re-roll 1s.
Yep.
Roll. So of your 80 dice, of your 63 going through, of your 42 wounds successful, I take 3 damage.
Yeah, you killed 3 dice. Yeah. And so sometimes that happens. Yeah.
Why?
And it's all those dice gates, like, for nothing.
Yeah.
For either way too much of a payoff, like it ends up too reliable, or it does.
It's like, oh, you've got 10 guys make 68 saves.
Yeah.
You failed 45.
Yeah.
45 guys die. There's only 10. Okay, well, they're dead.
They're really dead. No.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I don't know. Some people complain about the lethality in the game. I whatever, embrace it. But if you're going to keep it that lethal, then Marines have to be Marines. Mm-hmm. You've now spread out like you talked about, they've spread out the strength and toughness, they've spread out the wounds, they've spread out the damage in a way to make it granular enough where you can start leading them closer to movie Marines.
Yeah. Because like every time you increase the stats up like that, it just squashes how insignificant a Marine is.
Yeah.
Because their stat is not scaling linearly with the top end, right? Like strength, toughness 8 used to be the highest thing. Now the toughness
and that was
14.
a Wraith Lord or a Wraith Knight.
Now it's
was
14.
Tough 8. Yeah.
Like,
yep.
Marines should be up to 5 or 6 by now if they're going to scale with that.
Yep.
A guardsman might be bumped up from 3 to 4. Like, all the low end stuff didn't get touched. It all needs to go up.
Well, and I don't think it was like they just overlooked it, because it was like some stats on stuff changed. Like Gene Stealers got an extra wound, and Aspect Warriors became strength tough 4, and like, but then they got to, it was fine with like guardsmen or Gretchen or whatever staying low, but they gave them other things they can do, and I feel like there's this weird design philosophy at and I'm just guessing. I think there's this mixture of old and new, and that's not to say new's always better, but there are these voices that are so afraid to change what everybody knows about their games. And in AOS, they're willing to do it because it's a newer game. They're willing to just change everything every time. 40K has been around so long and it's so iconic, and there are certain things about it that are iconic. And we talked about that in terms of like getting rid of the Codex Band-Aid and going, I think there's just some old voices in there. They're like, well, there's always...
Space Marines have always been 4s across the board.
Just it. I think there's...
Strength, tough.
Used to be initiative.
Initiative 4, used to be weapon skill, ballistic skill 4, which means that 7 minus ballistic skill was what you needed to roll to hit.
But weapon skill was versus their weapon skill? Yeah.
Anyway, so it was you're always holding 4s across the board. It's like, you're right, they have always been it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't need to be
it's
that.
Time.
Like, keeping things the same for the sake of keeping them the same, it's like traditions, right? It's always been like that. Is not a good enough reason for me to keep something the same when it's stupid or unnecessary or irrelevant.
Well, especially
you're allowed to change it,
especially when you've been willing to stretch out everywhere else, but you're so accustomed to seeing that number 4 in multiple places on a Space Marine, and so I think that's a part of why they kept it. They thought it was still a good baseline. And again, I'm just guessing, but I think we've got precedent to think that way. Because it's the same, I think, with hanging on to codexes. We thought they were slowly moving in the direction of, let's make this all digital. And then they went, well, no, now we're going to double paywall you to get your rules. So, and I think it's that same thing. I think there's just a couple of these, like, they want to rip it too slow to watch every arm hair come out, or I guess.
Or a nose hair. What's the most back hair?
Nose hair is super painful to just pull out. Yeah. And so they're just doing it so slowly for some of those things. And Space Marines are one of them. So maybe this is, in that article, this is what they're referring to. Marines are going to get a shake-up, specifically Marines. They did shake up AdMech like they said they were going to.
Yeah.
AdMech are now starting to post some results. I think Agents of the Imperium has been kind of a miss.
But see, here's the thing with them, though, right? So if they do shake up Space Marines, they start doing some stats, I think they need to do everything. And that's going to end up shaking up things like shared weapons between armies, right? Unless they tag everything with, this is an Astartes version of this thing.
Right.
It's going to change for multiple armies. Is a las cannon going to change? Nope, this is an Astartes las cannon. Everyone else uses a normal las cannon. Is a heavy bolter going to change? Because that affects guards, it affects sisters. Nope, this is an Astartes heavy bolter.
Right, or they're called a Primaris version or whatever, yeah.
So, I mean, because I think a lot of those gun profiles need to change. Because I'll tell you what, for anti-tank, if you want to get rid of, like, some of the annoyance of Space Marines is that they have all those rerolls, those Oath of the Moment and all that shit. Part of it is that they have guns that aren't strong enough to do a job that have rerolls so they can actually do the job. If they took the rerolls out and just gave them better guns, they upped the strength on a las cannon. They gave it more reliable damage, so it's not D6, it's D3 plus 3, D3 plus 4, whatever you want to set. You set these numbers to, right, so that it makes more sense. You could do that for other armies and affect them too in a positive way. Because I like, but again, they need to be shaken up because a Sister of Battle, wounded unit firing melta-guns, if it was, higher strength than it is now they get +1 to hit and wound when wounded, when the unit's wounded. Now it's too good. So they have to be careful with what they do.
They do.
If they don't.
And physically, there is a difference between like a sororitas or a guardsman wielding a bolt gun, whereas a Marine bolt gun's as big as those people are.
Yeah.
And so they could, if they decided to call it a Astartes pattern, whatever, then punch it up, because make everything about the Marines punched up a bit. And so maybe they would do it. Maybe they would just do it for them at first. But it never fails in 40K. Space Marines almost always somehow get 2 updates per edition compared to everybody else.
One at the beginning, one at the end. One at the beginning again.
This is kind of mid. Yeah. But
I would love to see that kind of thing. And like I said, that you could make it just for Space Marine specific. And it would affect all Space Marines, right? So within the book, certain things would get knocked down because if a power weapon doesn't get better, or maybe it does. Maybe a power weapon does become scaled with the strength that increases potentially.
And I wish
it would shake up a lot.
I think AOS did something better than 40K, and that's like their formations versus the 40K detachments. And that could be by design. They want the detachments to be more impactful.
Because I like the list building better in AOS because, well, the points are higher to start with, so you can't bring as much stuff. But you don't need that rule of 3.
Nope.
Right? Because it's like, I have these detachment systems that have an actual effect on my game and my priority in the game and what units are being targeted by the enemy units,
General's Regiment.
Regiment. So there's like There's some chess to be played
Yep.
with how
And the
wide
battle tactic you select every turn.
all of that. And so you don't need to limit artificially, oh, well, you don't have 3 of any unit. Because, like, some armies just couldn't play then if they could only bring 3 of a specific unit, because certain armies don't have 2 different units that they can bring 3 of.
I didn't have to.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of tough for some armies. And so, like, I do like the natural way it changed list building in AOS.
Well, in AOS, then a lot of armies, a lot of times also just don't even need 3 of a thing. It's like, well, I just need this 1 unit to perform this role, and it eats up a chunk of my points anyway.
Right, because like we had talked about before in AOS, it's you bring 3 of the same unit. Maybe they've got a once per turn per army ability that you can't use on all units.
But that cost is probably baked into them.
And so you can only use it for 1 unit. So you've got some redundancy if that unit dies, but you're not triggering this thing on all 3 units simultaneously.
Yeah.
That's maybe a reason why you wouldn't want to bring 3 of that unit. Maybe you want to reinforce 1 unit so that unit it survives longer and can do it multiple turns. That kind of
But with a few exceptions, I also like that the formations themselves in AOS aren't huge in terms of the rules they apply to an army.
Yeah.
Some exceptions, like Night Hunt had a really good one until they fixed it. It's still pretty good. And then a lot of armies do fall into taking the same one. But in 40K, I feel like the detachments are almost everything, where it's like, well, you just find which one is the best, and then you just play that one because it does so much. And I wonder why the design that way. It's like, I know they want them to feel like different armies or the sub-factions that used to exist, but it's like some of them you made these like fluffy
and they're so restrictive for no benefit.
That are ultra restrictive with no benefit, and it just does a thing like, oh, you get a +3 inch on a once per game, and then it's like, but then other detachments in the same army give all these huge universal bonuses.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Maybe that's what they're going to look at, is like if that detachment format for Marines
maybe we're
needs to
being
be
too
changed.
optimistic about very, very big sweeping changes.
Yep.
I expect more realistically, we're going to see some tweaks to some artifacts, tweaks to some upgrades, tweak to some points, maybe some leadership abilities for some characters, some tweaks to some detachments. That's what we're going to see.
I think mostly for Marines, it's going to be that they're going to shuffle the detachments, shuffle the enhancements.
Maybe take this enhancement from this detachment and put it in this one. Because the combo of these 2 are too good, but if you split them up into 2 different ones away from each other,
you have a tougher choice.
Maybe now it's harder to choose. Maybe they're less powerful as a combo.
I would love to see Marines get a boost, but you could be right, because that then it'll update in the app, but your book and your cards are now invalid. Yep.
I would like to see also another change, another shake up to Space Marines and the Space Marines factions in general, and that's to limit which of the core, if any, core detachments from Space Marines are available to them, right? So maybe Dark Angels, it makes sense that they've got an all-mounted biker detachment, so they have got that one available to them.
The Outrider one, whatever
maybe
it's called.
It makes sense that they've got the first company Terminator one available to them, right? Maybe it makes sense they have the Infiltratee one available to them, but the other 3 don't make sense for Dark Angels thematically, so they don't get access to it. I'd like to see a list of saying, well, Dark Angels can take the one in their book, or they have access to these 3 detachments from Kiddock Space Marines.
Yeah, because what happened so far with both Divergent chapter books, Dark Angels and the new Blood Angels, is, well, they're just going to be straight up better than all other Marines because they can take Marines' best attachment and now put my super awesome specialized units
Here's
in
my inner circle. Here's my better Terminators. Here's my better bikes. Here's my better everything.
Here's my better Assault Marines, the Death Company, and all that. Yeah, and so that, I don't like that. We had hoped right away when they were doing that system where it was like, well, now whatever chapter you play in generic Codex Space Marines, you can take any detachment and it doesn't matter what color your Marines are. I was like, cool, they're not punishing the hobbyist.
Right.
And any Marine,
but they're rewarding the Divergent chapters. Cool.
But then the Divergent was like, yep, they can use all the Codex Marine detachments.
And we're like, until they get their own supplement, right? Until they get their own, right?
Yeah.
No. Even so, they now have 10 detachments available to them instead of the 7 that they normally would have. It's too much.
Which was always the same issue when stratagems were a thing. Yeah. Where it was like, oh, Marines get the ones from their Divergent book and the ones from the core book, so they get 35 stratagems to choose from, and everybody else has 8 or whatever.
What a lot of tools. That's awesome.
Yeah. And so, but then that's just it. Then you needed all those extra rules to make Marines better. How about you just make Marines better?
Yeah. Because there were ways to make them better. Like, when Blood Angels had a minute where they were all +1 to wound on the charge, and +1 attack, and +1 AP, it was like, That'd do it.
That does it.
That's what it takes to make a Marine good in close combat. Is all of those things.
Yep.
And only one army gets it. It's like, that sucks. Or what was it? Every charging unit in White Scars, when they had it, was +1 damage. You were double damage on the charge with run and charge on every single thing. Yeah, that would make melee pretty good. You doubled, more than doubled their effectiveness, because they're getting there more reliably, and they're twice as much damage when they actually hit. That'd do it. Yeah. Silly.
It is silly. So that's a lot to think about. A lot to and all of this, a lot of it's just wish listing and guessing. But like you said, because they said they're going to do stuff for Space Marines, and then they said they're also going to do another points pass. And so I think they're going to look at some tournament data to close the year. I know they had to cancel the U.S. Open in Tampa because of the hurricane, which makes sense. They refunded everybody, but it always stinks to lose a major event like that.
Especially considering the people were planning to go to it. And yeah, your tournament got refunded, but what about your hotel? What about your rental? What about your plans? What about your vacation time from your job? Like,
hopefully you can get it back.
That stuff, like, that's
hopefully they let you cancel it.
All the plans involved. Like, could you imagine if Adepticon got canceled? How much?
2020? That sucks.
I know. But how much crap you have to scrap? And get sucks.
And that's also on the gaming community side. That's a huge pile of data that now we won't have. But there's still other events coming, and I think that's what they're planning by the end of the year is these holiday boxes, and then they'll do this. Space Marines get an update, and then some points adjustments if they think they need them. I don't know what those would be since they just did it.
Maybe the points adjustments are required with the new updates to rules and stuff, and they're doing those separately, so it's not like, here's a gigantic change to your army, and here's a gigantic points adjustment.
Because I think Marines didn't get touched much in this one, and they made it sound like they just weren't done with it yet. So that could be. So who knows? It could be some stat changes and therefore some point changes, and then shake up the detachments. That, I think, would go a long way to making Marines a lot better.
Yep, they
make Marines a main course army again.
They can't go much lower, because like you said, there are specialist units that are good, but most generic Marines just don't get.
Yeah, you don't even play them.
Intercessors and tacticals and all that. So, make them a main course. Make them a real threat. Make them something that you go out of your way to try to consume. Speaking of which,
we could go out of our way to get something to eat. Yeah.
Let's eat. Thanks for joining. We hope you enjoyed. Follow us for more of our weekly episodes on YouTube Podcasts, Spotify, and Podbean. You can follow myself and Llama on Instagram. We are at Llama Paints Minis and Hyena Paints Minis. Music provided by Kevin MacLeod at incompetech.com. And as always, we'll catch you next time.